Hello students, let's just review what we have learned so far. Now can someone tell me what is learning?
It's a relatively permanent change.
Very good. It's a change. Change in what?
In behavior and knowledge.
Very good. Change in behavior and knowledge. And this change is a result of all our past experience. We finished talking about classical conditioning, operant conditioning. We finished talking about the cognitive influences on learning. Today, we are going to learn about verbal learning. What is verbal learning?
A change in verbal behavior.
Today, we are going to study a little bit more about this verbal behavior. What is verbal learning? It is the acquisition and retention of verbal information. In everyday terms, it is known as memorization. Who was the very first person who spoke about verbal information? You have this person called Hermann Ebbinghaus who talked to us about nonsense syllables. Rather than memorize poems, speeches or other writings, he created lists of artificial verbal units called nonsense syllables. For example, K-E-C, Q-U-Z, K-I-Z. They make no sense. These words make no sense. They are made up of two consonants and a vowel in between. Now, if I take you to an experimental condition and ask you to study a poem or an essay, you may have already studied it. So, to see that all of you have the same level of difficulty, Hermann Ebbinghaus, as early as 1885, invented the nonsense syllables. A basic unit, it is an artificial verbal unit. It is made up of two consonants and one vowel. Psychologists have devised 4 important methods to study more about verbal learning. The first method is paired associate learning. It is to link two verbal items together. There is a stimulus word, there is a response word. Now, I want to learn more about the English language and I know only Hindi. So, my stimulus word will be naam and my English response word will be name. So, what do I do in paired associate learning? I link two words. And when I want to check you, I just give you the stimulus word and the stimulus word in Hindi will be naam and the response word will be name. That's how I try to learn a new language, or I create another stimulus response word for you to understand what is verbal learning. Bring about a pair of words, two words, it could be two different languages, it could be in the same language, and I try to bring about one stimulus and a response. I ask you the stimulus, you're supposed to give me the response. And I come to find out whether you have really learned the association between two words. The second important method psychologists used is known as serial learning. Serial learning is to learn the sequence in which a set of verbal items occurs. When I'm studying the English language, I study A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I learn the order. Can you tell me the order in the Hindi alphabet, in the Hindi language?
A, E, E, U, A, I, O,
Very good. So you're learning an order. When I'm teaching you the months of the year, how exactly does the serial order of the months of the year goes?
Jan, Feb, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November.
Very good.
December.
So we go in a particular order. So when I interchange the order, and to know whether you have really learned my verbal information, the second way of checking is, have you learned the order of the words I have presented it? So that is how psychologists learned about verbal information. So the second important method was serial learning. We now go on to the third method. The third method is verbal discrimination. It means to differentiate between the verbal items. And the last method psychologists use is free recall. Free recall is to recall a set of items without regard for the order in which they occurred originally. I talk about 10 important words you have to study, 10 important terms you have to study, 10 important stimuli you have got to study, 10 nonsense syllables, and I ask you to recall in any order. When you are recalling in any order, not in a particular order, but in any order, it is known as free recall. Now, how is it I'm studying? How is it I can study? How do I acquire? How do I memorize verbal learning? What is learning by heart known as? My students call it Batti Maro Fine. What is that called? So the first method is known as rote learning. Simple repetition learning in a mechanical fashion without thinking about the meaning of information. I read my list 10 times. I go on reading it and reading it and reading it and reading it till I can recall it. That is simple repetition. I'm not thinking, I'm just reading it over and over again. It is known as the rote method of learning. Learning by not understanding the meaning. I just repeat it again and again and again. The first important way is rote learning, especially for the exams. Many of us study through rote learning. The second important way is maintenance rehearsal. Once again, a shallow, unthinking strategy best for maintaining information in memory temporarily, just for a few seconds, not for long-term retention. If you remember the chapter on memory, information is coming to us and it is touching our sensory organs. It remains in our sensory organs for a short period of time. But if I want to remember it for a little long period of time, I take that information and bring it to my short-term memory. And so when I need this important number, I keep repeating it as 985347, 985347, and I then ring up my friend and call her. So this kind of just repeating it once again, just for short-term use, is known as maintenance rehearsal. Rote memory is for long-term remembrance. This is for short-term remembrance, and then you just forget about it. Now there is another way how you can memorize, how you can learn verbal information. The third important way is elaborative rehearsal. It is giving meaning as you rehearse verbal information. When I'm learning, I try to learn by understanding the meaning of what I'm learning. I try to understand. If I don't understand a particular word, I refer the dictionary, I try to understand, and then I try to link it with my past knowledge, with my past memories. So today I'm talking a little bit about learning, and when I started about learning, I tried to bring about a relationship with definition. What were the different types of learning? And now we are coming to another type of learning called verbal information, verbal learning. So when I'm linking it this way, it is easy for me to remember, it is easy for me to acquire, it is easy for me to learn verbal information. And the last method that we use while studying verbal information is recitation. It is memorizing by giving a certain proportion of time to attempting to repeat orally or silently what has been learnt. I read, I try to understand, I close my book and I try to remember the points. So when I'm remembering the points, I'm getting a feel of how much I have studied, how much I don't know. And what I don't know, I pay more attention. I try to link it once again, try to understand it, try to study it once again. And that method is known as recitation, where I try to recall time and again what I already know. So it's very important for students to know that recitation is one of the very important method of learning, where you read, you try to understand, you read it again, you close your book, you try to recall, pay attention to what you don't know and try to study it once again so that it remains in your memory. With this, we conclude verbal learning. We are now going to jump into another topic in learning called motivational influences on learning. How much you learned, what you learned, all depends upon motivation. Ma'am, I studied so much, I forgot. Why is it what you learned, how much you learned depends on motivation? What is motivation? It is the drive or the desire. It is an internal process from within that directs my behavior, that sustains my behavior, that initiates my behavior. So motivation is an internal urge from within. It is a process from within that helps me to start a behavior, initiate a behavior. It helps you to sustain my behavior, continue my behavior, and ultimately complete my behavior. So when I'm studying, it is very important that I have the will to learn and the will to remember. Oh, I always forget. If I say that time and again, I will forget verbal information. So I have to have a desire to learn, desire to remember. And here comes the most important point called intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. What is intrinsic motivation? What is extrinsic motivation?
Motivated, it is intrinsic.
Very good.
And when someone else motivates or something else, external factors motivate.
Excellent. When I love studying psychology, I just love to listen to psychology. I love to read psychology books. I just want to do my course in psychology. That is known as intrinsic motivation. I'm doing a task. I'm trying to reach a goal because I am really enjoying studying my verbal information in psychology. Who will tell me what is extrinsic motivation?
When there's a gold medal or
Very good.
any incentives that you get.
Very good, very good. And what are the incentives Priyanka mummy gives you if at all you get the first rank?
She buys me something.
Very good. And what is the thing that she bought for you last time when you got the first rank?
Mobile phone.
Very good. Yeah, that mobile phone becomes the incentive. Excellent. So things beyond us are attracting us to study our verbal information. So incentives, rewards, verbal praise, or maybe sometimes it's punishment. If you do not get the first rank, see what I will do to you. So because you're frightened, you try to study verbal information. So first important point that affects our verbal learning or any type of learning is the will to learn and the will to remember. The second one is emotional state. And the third one is intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. What do you mean by emotional state? Which are the emotions that help you study well?
If you are in a happy state, then you will study better than if you are in an agitated state.
Very good. A happy state helps you to study well. An agitated state does not help you to study well. Yes, Priscilla?
When you're confident and you have positive mind.
Very good. When you think positively, when you're confident about yourself, you study well, you learn quickly. It's very true that positive emotions like happiness, joy, positive frame of mind, curiosity. I want to know more about psychologists. I want to know more about the field of psychology. So there is a tendency that you study well and you perform well. Mild anxiety also helps you to perform well, helps you to study well. But too much of anxiety, too much of fear, too much of anger, too much of panic does not help us to study well, does not help us to learn, or does not help us in our performance. So emotional state is also very powerful while you are learning something new. The next important motivational influence is called attribution. What is attribution?
It is similar to association, or you associate or you believe that something is good or bad.
We all have certain beliefs regarding success. We have certain beliefs regarding failure. We have certain beliefs about ourselves. I am no good, or I am good. I'm good in maths, I'm not good in maths. So if I believe I'm not good in something, there are chances that I do not learn well. So attribution are your expectations, your beliefs, your thinking regarding failure and success. Another important term that is very, very related to attribution is self-efficacy. Does anyone know what is self-efficacy?
It's towards the capacity of a person.
Self-efficacy is my belief regarding my performance. Is my belief about my capacity, is my belief about my ability to complete a task. There are so many of us, we are all excited in the beginning, I'll do it, I'll do it. Ultimately, you say, no, I don't think I can do it, and you give up. That is self-efficacy, where you feel you do not have the ability, you do not have the capacity, you are just not able to complete the task. While in attribution, you're talking in general about another kind of a basic belief that tells you whether you're going to be a success or a failure, or I'm just no good, I'm good for nothing, I am an idiot, I'm a stupid girl. And that affects your learning process.
Suppose I think, okay, if I start studying now, then I can finish it. So does this thinking come under attribution, or does it come under self-efficacy?
Very good. You are now going on to the last important point called self-regulation. Another important motivational influence on learning, and the last one is self-regulation. Here is Annie, and her goal is, what is your goal, Annie?
Okay, suppose my exams are nearing, I start it at a particular time so that I may finish it.
Okay, what's your goal? You want to finish a revision.
Yes,
that's your goal.
Want to finish
your goal is, I want to finish revision in psychology by the time the date of my psychology exam comes. So now I first set a goal, then I start planning, then I monitor my success and ultimately evaluate, hey, am I going according, I make a timetable. That is self-regulation. In the meantime, when my beliefs are upsetting me, I try to write down my beliefs and find out, why am I feeling this way? So the beliefs are different. Self-regulation is when you actually look at yourself and plan ahead, how am I going to reach the goal? And if I'm not successful this time I got only 63 in psychology, so the next time I want 76. I sit maybe one day in advance, I monitor my own growth, and I change or adjust or bring about new strategies, new ways of learning, put in one more extra hour of study, and try to reach my goal of 76 marks in psychology. What are the 6 important motivational influences on learning? Yes,
the will
Swati?
to learn.
Will to learn and the will to remember?
Intrinsic motivation, extrinsic
Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
Emotional state.
Emotional state.
Attribution.
Attribution.
Self-efficacy.
Self-efficacy.
Self-regulation.
Self-regulation. Is it clear? These 6 important motivational influences play a great role, and that is why many of our students need to remember these 6 goals, these 6 influences, because sometimes I have my students studying and not able to perform. Maybe there is something wrong in their belief, in their expectation, and there we jump into the cognitive influences. All this comes under cognitive. Cognitive is your mental process, your mental thinking. Change your mental process, be more positive, and try and say, I love my psychology, and try to study well, and try to acquire more and more knowledge in your learning process. So today we spoke about verbal learning, we spoke about the motivational influences, and now we are jumping into transfer of learning. What is transfer of learning? So applying the skills, knowledge and attitudes that were learned in situations to another learning situation, And because it increases my speed of learning, it is known as transfer of learning. Whatever I've learned, I now use it. I've learned a little bit about general psychology. I'm learning about general psychology. Next year, you're going to learn a little bit more about cognitive psychology, and then you'll be learning a little bit more about social psychology. I need to know some basic amount of general psychology for me to understand social psychology, and there transfer of learning takes place. You went to the first standard, you learned the basic alphabet of the English language, and that is helping you to learn so many more things in life, and that is known as transfer of learning. The first person who spoke about transfer of learning was Edward Thorndike and Robert Woodworth. In the year 1924, they formulated the theory of identical elements. Previous learning, facilitating new learning only to the extent that new learning task contains elements identical to the previous task.
Is transfer of learning positive?
Yes, many a times it's positive, many a times it is negative, many a times it's zero, and many a times it's called bilateral. Now, what exactly does it mean positive? When previous learning, when prior learning helps me to learn better in the future, it is known as positive transfer of learning. When training, prior training helps me to do better, it's known as positive transfer of training. Now, if you look at the picture, you will find that there is a picture of a person. Any one of you who has learned maths will find it easier to learn statistics. If you have learned science, it is easier for you to learn engineering. But an art student will find it a little difficult to learn engineering. So when past learning does not facilitate future learning, when it hinders future learning, it is known as negative transfer of learning. When learning of one task inhibits, prevents, hinders the learning of another task, it is called negative transfer of learning. And now when I give training to one part of the body, if it affects the learning and training of the other part of the body, it is known as bilateral transfer of learning or training. When I give training to one part of my body and it affects the training in another part of the body, it is known as bilateral transfer of learning. For example, I've learned to write in the left hand, but even if you ask me to write with my right hand, it's possible for me to write because training in one part of the hand has also facilitated training in the other part of the hand. That is known as bilateral transfer of learning. And finally, you have something called the zero transfer of learning, where in this situation, acquiring a new skill or reaching the solution of a new problem neither facilitated or hindered due to past experience or training. So there is no improvement, there is no problem, and that kind of transfer of learning is called zero transfer of learning.
Ma'am, do you have any factors of transfer of learning?
Very good. There are certain factors that affect transfer of training, transfer of learning. The first is similarity of the elements, similarity of the stimuli. It has to be similar. What the past learning has to be similar to the future learning, and that is why I am able to learn and do much better. I learn a little bit about psychology, and then it's easier for me to do MA in psychology because I have a background of psychology. It's easier for me to learn more about higher levels in psychology. So similarity is very important. Second is interest and motivation. I have to have the interest, I have to have the motivation, and when there is interest, when there is motivation, you find that transfer of learning does take place. Your past experience, whatever you learn nowadays, children are taught computer skills as early as lower KG and upper KG, lower kindergarten and upper kindergarten. But when we were small, we didn't have this great gift. So I took a longer time to learn the computer than my niece who's only 5 years, she knows the computer much more than me. She knows how to use the computer better than me because she is already trained as early as 3 to 4 years. So we conclude today by remembering that we learn something about verbal information. And how do we learn in general? That we have to motivate ourselves. There are different types of motivational influences, and ultimately whatever we learn can be used at a later stage, and that is known as transfer of learning. Or when you take the training and apply it to learn another new task, it is known as transfer of training.